Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We're going to wait another few minutes before we start this SolSmart webinar just to ensure that everyone has a chance to log on, but we will be back in about a minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started now. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today, in which we're going to be talking about best practices for solar and electric bus charging at transit agencies. We're really glad to have you here today to participate in the series. In July, we presented an overview of the benefits of integrating solar and electric vehicle charging, and a recording of that webinar is available on the SolSmart website, along with numerous other SolSmart resources. Today's webinar dives deeper into solar and EV charging specifically at transit agencies. We have an excellent panel lined up for you, including Cadmus and NREL, who are part of the SolSmart team, and representatives from agencies around the country, including Indigo in Indianapolis, VTA in Santa Clara County, California, and Oahu Transit and Hawaiian Electric. Before we get started, we'd like to give you a very quick overview of SolSmart since many of you may be new to the program. Next slide, Juana. So SolSmart is a U.S. Department of Energy funded assistance and recognition program that aims to reduce solar costs and promote the growth of strong solar markets. Led by the Solar Foundation and in partnership with experts from NREL, Cadmus, and others, the program provides no-cost technical assistance to communities that pursue SolSmart designation. Next slide. As you can see from the table here, the SolSmart technical assistance available covers pretty much all of the levers of control and influence that municipalities can use to promote solar. These include permitting, planning and zoning, community engagement, utility engagement, market development actions, and much more. However, if you call on SolSmart technical assistance, it must be specifically related to solar. We can't provide assistance on EV or e-bus projects unless they relate to the integration with solar. Furthermore, any such request would need to come from a city, county, or regional government entity, since these are the entities that are eligible to participate in SolSmart. For any transit agencies who are listening in today, you can work with any city or county that you serve to make a request, and we would be able to help you. The technical assistance is available through October of 2020, so please take advantage of it. Next slide. With that, let's go ahead and jump right in. My colleague, Michelle Levinson, who does a lot of our electric bus work, will kick us off with an overview of some of the big emerging questions in this space. And then she'll be followed by brief presentations from each of our panelists on their experience integrating solar and electric buses. Finally, we'll move into a dialogue and a Q&A. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it right over to Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle Levinson, an associate with the Cadmus Group, focused on strategic electrification. In our work, we have seen transit agencies all over the country begin to install solar. Here is a sample of those agencies we're aware of. Next slide. There are numerous benefits to integrating PV and transit electrification. For instance, transit agencies can directly benefit by securing fuel cost savings and by taking advantage of efficiencies from shared design, construction, and installation of infrastructure when both are done together. Additionally, solar and storage can help offset the need for costly upgrades, which the utility may or may not be able to fund for the agency. Beyond the benefits that can accrue directly to the agency, the community will benefit as well. One example is reduced air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. Another is a benefit to consumers resulting from lower costs for the electricity system by reducing upgrade needs and spreading costs over more kilowatt hours. Next. Transit agencies can integrate solar in a variety of ways. PV alone, PV coupled with bus electrification, and PV and bus electrification with managed charging and/or storage. The most straightforward way would be to install solar on agency buildings or sites without consideration of the energy needs of electric buses. Examples of how some agencies have introduced solar into their operations include solar-powered real-time bus tracker displays like this one in Petaluma, which can improve rider experience and the resilience of transit operations, and also solar parking arrays, such as the one installed by Metro Transit in Minnesota, which can offset the energy costs of the facilities and familiarize agencies with operating a PV system. These can provide shade for buses, reducing sun exposure, and saving costs for cooling. Next slide. But the opportunities for transit agencies to leverage solar really come together when electric buses enter the conversation. Consider that a single electric bus can utilize about 350 kilowatt hours in one day. This is equivalent to the electricity consumed daily by 15 average American households. In other words, when looking at the fleet level and talking about hundreds or thousands of buses, transit electrification poses significant new electric load. As I just noted, next slide, please. As I just noted, the value proposition of solar is more substantial when coupled with the load that electric buses provide. More on-site consumption may lead to economies of scale and cheaper cost per kilowatt of the solar procurement. Depending on the state and local policies, the agency may also be able to offset its utility bills through net energy metering. Unfortunately, it is important to note that solar production hours often overlap directly with the hours in which the agency buses are in use. You can see this in the graph we took here. This graph here we took from an agency we work with that shows the charging profile compared against solar production hours. If time of use rates are in effect, the definition of the solar peak period, or rather the peak period and the relative value of credits generated on peak versus off peak will have a substantial impact on the overall cost effectiveness of a solar solution. For instance, in California, peak periods are being shifted to the evening hours in recognition of the solar duck curve, and this will have an adverse effect on the economics of many solar systems without storage. As an example of the technical assistance SolSmart can provide, we can help agencies understand net metering policy, utility tariffs, the overall value proposition of solar, and provide preliminary guidance on sizing solar to serve electric bus loads. Some examples of agencies thinking ahead and sizing solar with bus electrification in mind include Indigo and Mendocino Transit Authority. Mendocino installed solar years prior to their acquisition of electric buses, but sized the systems with the intention of procuring electric buses at a later date. It is receiving net surplus compensation for generation in excess of its site needs until it adds more load. In the case of Indigo, from whom we'll hear more in a few moments, a 1 megawatt solar installation powers the nation's first electric bus rapid transit system. Next. The most value-creating solar configuration for transit agencies is likely to be a combination of solar, electric buses, managed charging software, and on-site battery storage. For one, this combination allows agencies to avoid costly demand charges on their electric utility bills, a tactic often referred to as peak shaving. Prior to managing demand, an example agency in California was incurring electric bills that resulted in a fuel cost of over $1 per mile, when diesel hybrid fueling costs were less than half of that. implementing demand management cut their cost per mile by more than 50%. Agencies can also utilize this configuration of resources to shift electricity consumption to the most economical time of the day by charging the storage batteries when on-site solar is generating or grid electricity is cheap. Additionally, by installing a combination of behind-the-meter resources, agencies can bolster their resilience. The robust combination of solar, electric buses, managed charging, and battery storage can help agencies retain operational capabilities and service during grid outages. In the future, agencies may even be able to look to buses to supply power to critical services through vehicle-to-grid capabilities. Next. As agencies enter this new paradigm, it is inevitable that they face novel challenges. One implication of the adoption of solar and electric buses by transit agencies is a change in how costs hit agency balance sheets. This new technological paradigm translates to significantly higher upfront costs, coupled with substantial savings on operations. For agencies, navigating this transition requires a shift in the institutional mindset around budgeting for these capital and operating expenses. Agencies can benefit from communicating these changes early on to key stakeholders such as internal departments and external oversight and funding boards. As an aside, in our work with agencies across the country, we also have found that transit providers are keenly interested in innovative financing solutions to help them implement these projects. For instance, on-bill financing is an example of a promising solution because it leverages utilities' access to capital and helps transit agencies avoid debt on their balance sheets. Our modeling has shown that this sort of arrangement can provide substantial funding leverage. When coupled with solar, additional savings and additional upfront costs need to be financed, but the combined system will likely have greater value to an agency. Shifting to solar and electric buses also means new factors to consider in transit operations. Rather than managing fuel costs over monthly or annual variation, agencies will face dynamic electricity prices over the course of the day and will need to manage against these short-term fluctuations. Likewise, these burgeoning technologies do not have the same operational characteristics as the fossil-fueled vehicles they are replacing. Charging occurs over multiple hours rather than during a quick visit to the fueling station. The range that agencies can expect from electric buses on one charge is not comparable to what they can expect from conventional buses on a single tank. In our work with San Joaquin Regional Transit District, this has meant keeping additional spare buses on hand to finish out the day. As agencies begin to move towards solar coupled with electric buses, this also means engaging with a new regulatory landscape. Agencies will be exposed to distinct risks from those that they may be accustomed to facing with conventional fuels. Issues like participation in net energy metering or design of utility tariffs are shaped by state legislatures and public utility commissions. Transit agencies can leverage SolSmart or industry groups or peer networks for support as they look to engage in these unfamiliar forums, as our panelists from Hawaii will discuss. Next slide. Another important consideration is the role of transit agencies in providing emergency response services in their communities. During recent fires and power outages, Sonoma County Transit called upon its buses to serve as mobile warming and Wi-Fi centers, as well as to provide transportation for evacuees. Battery electric buses can have some limitations in this regard. For instance, the range of today's battery electric buses still may be insufficient to meet evacuation needs. However, all fuels have their own resilience risks, and diesel and gasoline are not immune to supply chain risk. The key is not to put all your eggs in one basket. We ran analyses for some transit agencies recently and found that under the assumptions we used, the economics of using solar and storage for resilience purposes were quite challenging. However, even the amount of solar and storage that an agency may install for electricity cost arbitrage can still provide some limited resilience benefits. By introducing a new energy supply to your transit system, agencies are diversifying their risk exposure. Resilience is only one of the issues that will become more acute as agencies scale their electric fleets. Agencies are finding that the infrastructure, operational, and cost impacts of installing solar and procuring electric buses are relatively manageable with the first round of procurements. However, as the fleet grows, site needs also expand. For one, capacity for on-site solar is often not sufficient to match bus electricity consumption. Depending on local utility policies, transit agencies may need to look to install solar off-site or to pursue power purchase agreements to meet their new energy needs. Additionally, agencies may need to invest in advanced charge management tools and make changes to driver and mechanic operating protocols to meet the distinct requirements of an electrified transit fleet. Next. As agencies progress through the stages we have laid out here, it is inevitable that they face novel challenges. The most important takeaway from this webinar is that agencies are not alone in navigating them. Cities and municipalities that participate in SolSmart should not hesitate to reach out for technical assistance as they plan out their next steps for solar and transit. Peer transit agencies, like those that are participating in the panel discussion in a few moments, are also great resources. Many agencies are at the initial stages of either solar or electrified transit, so it is important to share best practices early because this is a case of learning by doing. From operational savings and increased price certainty to reduced pollution and quieter bus operations, there are numerous benefits to pairing solar with electrified transit. If your local transit agency is considering one or the other, we encourage you to think about both and to take advantage of the no-cost technical assistance available from our team at SolSmart. Thank you very much, and now I'll pass it over to Juana.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, everyone. This is Juana. I'm a colleague of Michelle's and Philip's at Cadmus. And before we dive into our great panel we have planned for you, wanted to throw out a couple of poll questions just to see the interest of those on the line and also to get a better sense of who we have on the line. So I'm going to launch the very first poll question, which is about your role in solar and electric buses. So please, I'll give you a few minutes to submit your answers here. Okay, it looks like the answers are stabilizing, so I'm going to close this one. Thank you. Looks like we have a decent amount of local governments on the line, which is great. Hopefully you're working closely with your transit agencies. So let me close this one. And our next poll question is, what category best describes the transit agency that most directly serves your community? So if you are from a transit agency, feel free to answer this from your perspective of the agency's interests in electric buses and solar, or if you are from a local government, feel free to respond on behalf of how you evaluate your transit agency as currently being. And we know this is a new field, like Michelle showed. There's a few transit agencies that have adopted solar. There's also some that have adopted electric buses, but definitely the combination of both is an emerging area. Okay. All right, so that looks like it's stabilized too. Looks like there's more so transit agencies with electric buses that are interested in integrating solar, and then transit agencies that maybe haven't quite jumped in either category, but are certainly interested in doing so. Great. Well, thank you for providing that context. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. And we have several panelists on the line today, so a couple of representatives from Indigo, a representative from Santa Clara Valley Transit Authority, and also a representative from the National Renewable Energy Lab that did some work to support Santa Clara in their efforts to integrate solar with their electric buses. And then from Hawaii, we have both a representative from the transit agency and from Oahu Transit Services, and also a representative from a local utility, Hawaiian Electric. So, and for those of you looking at our webcams, we have a couple of the panelists that are sharing their webcams, so you can see our great faces as we talk. But we have more on the line that are just through phone, and we are going to start with Tierno at Indigo. And so I will turn it over to you.
Hello. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tierno Balde. I'm the manager of electric fleet maintenance at Indigo, and I'm here with Mark Crane, our facility manager, who participated on the placement of our solar arrays that we will be showing you today. Go to the next panel, please, the next slide. Okay, I'm going to go briefly present Indigo. Indigo is a fleet service, is a main fleet for Indianapolis public transportation, and we have 220 buses on our fleet and 29 bus lines being serviced every day with the first BRT rapid transit bus electric red line that we launched in September, and is a 60-foot full electric BYD bus. And we have 153 diesel buses on our fleet and 15 diesel hybrids. In 2015, Indigo purchased the first time our 21 electric bus, fully electric, 40-footers called ZEPS, Zero Emission Propulsion System, and bought from CCW, a company in California, and with energy storage capacity of 310 kilowatt hour and the charger of 35 kilowatt. In 2015, we've been operating those since until now. We still have them on our fleet. And 31 buses we purchased this year from BYD, 60-footers, and 31 of them being run right now with the red line, our bus rapid transit, Indigo red line that serves from from the north of Indy all the way to the south side of the city. It crosses Marion County. That's the Santa County of Indianapolis. And Indigo has an ongoing RFP for a purchase of 33 electric 40-footers buses that we plan to start operating in 2020. So let you guys know. Our projection as a company here, Transit at Indianapolis, is to go over fully electric by 2035, in which we anticipating to have on our fleet 55 articulated 60-foot electric buses and 154 40-footer low-flow electric buses by 2035. So to get those, we have work ahead. Indigo, you can see on the my slide here, we have worked to provide those capacity of charging, because who talk about electric vehicles, the most important, like you know, is the charging. So we have our facility powered right now, almost ready for 55. All those buses we're gonna have by 2035. So we have a power supply of 18.4 megavolt ampere of apparent power. This is available right now. You might see on this slide here, we have 12 transformer, powerful transformer, 1500 megavolt ampere each, that supply the building on the back side. And internally on the right top corner of the slide, you see those switchboards. They are like redundancy switchboard, having two different lines coming to it. So each one come over with 1500 megawatt ampere, 1500 kilowatt ampere. So we have 12 of these, 6 of these in our facility to service our chargers. And we have a 2 megawatt ampere power for the switchboard to charge our 21 electric buses we purchased earlier in 2015, and another 4 megawatt ampere power to power the rest of the building consumption. And we are operating on a facility with 9 acres. So I'm going to show you here how much power we consume. You can see the monthly power on October. We had consumed 907,000 over kilowatt hour of power, which is translate on $83,000 a month. This is our charge on electrical. And the demand charge only was 58,667. This is showing you how much important is for Indigo to manage its demand charge and work on how to manage to save more money and go more green due to the charge of those power. So to fix that, to reduce this consumption and to control our demand charge, you can go to the next slide, please. Indigo worked with federal government, and we got in 2015 3.2 million federal grant to build this 1 megawatt solar panel. You can see on this picture here. I don't know if the video is gonna work. Can you try to present?
Let's try it out.
Yes.
Is it showing?
Yeah, it's showing.
Okay.
But no.
Do you want to talk?
Yes.
Describe the
Yeah.
panels a little bit.
Yeah, on this you can see on top of the building here, the panels, the solar array panels are put on a surface area of 4 acres, and we have all them supplied here in 2015, and the roof was rebuilt before we do that to make sure we don't have to touch the roof within the next few years, and we have also all this utility you can see by there for the HVAC unit and other stuff all over on the roof. And we still have some space. If we'll see earlier over there, you will see we still have some space on the room for a future expansion. And on the right corner here on the screen. And so far, this has been operating since 2015. And we planning to go over on the other side if we could. And there is a possibility of expansion on the rooftop because we still have 2 acres left over. It was done by Telemon, a company in Indiana here. Thank you. So I can come back to the panel. Okay, so these panels are used, those solar arrays has allowed Indigo to be able to charge its 21 electric fleet ZEPs since 2015. And go to the next panel, please. And here we have put here a table. When you see, we compare in 2018 the production from the solar arrays and the consumption, the power consumption from our electric buses, the ZEPs. So you might see here on this curve here, the light green are the solar panel production, and the dark green is the charger, the bus charging. So you can easily see here from April in Indiana here to September, we have produced more energy than we have used to charge these buses. However, the rest of the energy was consumed by the rest of the building because we, like you said, on our power bill, we have a big consumer. So, and this has produced on the panel has produced in 2018, 1,117 megawatt ampere in 2018, which is like around $100,000 we saving for us on that only year. So Indigo, with that result, Indigo is working currently we have a grant again with 1.3 million to expand our solar production to 500 to 700 kilowatt hour, and we are at the concept phase. This is expected to be operational if everything goes well in 2020. we're gonna start using those things, and gonna go forward, like you see, and keep investing on the solar arrays to make sure we can cover our other BYD fleet and all the electric buses we thinking putting on our fleet in the next years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Hirno. And you mentioned your colleague Mark is on, so once we hear from our panelists and go into the discussion and Q&A, he'll be available to answer questions as well. And so next, we'll hear from Christina. She's a senior environmental planner with Santa Clara VTA, and she's going to walk us through the efforts at her transit agency. And then we will hear from Josh at NREL, who helped conduct some analysis to help VTAs analyze their solar potential. So Christina, take it away.
Thanks, Alana. I wanted to start off by giving a brief overview of the Santa Clara Valley Transportation Authority. We serve Santa Clara County, which is located in the southern part of the San Francisco Bay Area. We operate approximately 450 buses on 80 routes, and we also operate an electrified light rail system that is quite extensive. The next slide. So VTA has a very strong commitment to sustainability, and as part of our sustainability program, we installed 2.1 megawatts of solar panels at 3 of our bus operations and maintenance divisions. This was back in December 2011, which was a long time before we really even envisioned having electric buses. We were just beginning to procure diesel hybrid buses. We financed this solar installation through a power purchasing agreement, which means we had a third party who owned the facilities. And so we had no upfront cost, but we do pay the third party 23 cents per kilowatt hour at this time. We saw one of the benefits of the solar of being the net metering, which allows us to feed the grid and when we overgenerate. When we are able to do this during the middle of the day, we are able to generate in California a credit of 58 cents per kilowatt hour, which allows us to offset a large percentage of our utility bill. Because we're here in California with ample sunshine, in 2018, we generated 3.2 gigawatts of solar electricity, which offsets about 50% of our total annual usage. But as Michelle was mentioning in her presentation, there are going to be some pretty dramatic changes here in California, and I believe it's happening across the United States, where time of use periods are shifting from the middle of the day, which is 12 to 6, and to the evenings, 4 to 9. So, you know, for a lot of transit agencies, we have most of our operations in the evening when our buses come back off their routes. And same thing with electric buses. They tend to charge more in the evenings and the off-peak, the current off-peak. So we are anticipating that our number of credits will dramatically decrease and our electricity costs will dramatically increase at these facilities. So next slide. So fast forwarding to 2018, VTA began procuring its first 5 electric buses. They were 450 kW buses, and they went into revenue service in July of 2018. We used 6 60 kW depot chargers to charge the buses in the depot. They charge primarily, as I mentioned earlier, in the evenings and at night. And it generally takes between 4, depending on the state of charge, 4 to 6 hours to charge the buses. We're expecting 5 additional electric buses in early 2020. And since we're out here in California and we're required by the Innovative Clean Transit Rule to be zero emission by 2040, our fleet's just going to be getting larger and larger. I did want to mention that we've seen several benefits from having solar and electric buses on the same meter. The first is related to low carbon fuel standard credits. I'm not sure to what extent these are available in other parts of the country, but here in California, electrified transportation is eligible to receive these credits, which have monetary value. The value fluctuates based on demand, but they're mostly desired by petroleum producers and refineries, and we have been seeing their value go up dramatically. You sell them on various exchanges and other channels, but when you have electric transportation on the same meter as solar, you can qualify for a much higher level of credit. So it really does help us generate revenue and offset some of the costs of operating electric buses. I also wanted to mention that VTA sees there being other benefits to having solar on the same meters as electric buses. Michelle kind of touched on a lot of these, and these are opportunities that we are trying to leverage by incorporating energy storage. As I mentioned, with some of these dramatic changes in the design, rate designs, time of use periods, we see a real benefit of being able to store the solar electricity that's generated during the day and discharge that electricity during the evenings and at nights when our buses are charging. We think that can have pretty big benefits in terms of our energy costs and also the demand costs, which Thierno was referring to in Annapolis. We also see that there's the benefit of potentially deferring facility and grid upgrades, which we know can be extremely expensive in the tens of millions of dollars when you're talking about full fleet electrification. And then there's also the system upgrades that will be necessary for the grid, which also costs a lot of money and which also takes a lot of time. So we see those benefits. And then lastly, Michelle touched on this as well, we see that there are huge resiliency benefits of having solar and electric buses on the same meter. Out here in California, we have earthquakes, we have wildfires, and most recently we've been having these public safety power shutdowns where our grid can go out for 3 to 5 days or longer. And having something like a solar and energy storage can really provide additional backup electricity for us. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Josh, who's going to be talking about some of the work he's been doing with VTA.
Great, thank you, Christina. And I think you've heard a lot of information from the other panelists as well. So at the risk of repeating some of that, I do want to kind of reiterate some of those topics because we find those are very important, and then hopefully provide a few of the challenges and opportunities that we see having worked with VTA for one of their California Energy Commission grants in California. So if you can go to the next slide. So to provide a better example of what we mean when we say how the buses are charging versus when people are riding and the availability of solar, we have some data that we pulled from VTA that looks at their riderships. This is when people are getting on buses, and then compares that to solar profiles. So you can see throughout the hours of the day. So typical daily solar profile. And what this really means to us is that in the afternoon, you can see the peak ridership, and you're going to need the majority of your buses out providing service at that point. So they're not going to be there to charge from solar. So we'll have to look at some potentially other opportunities to integrate with it. There's a number of buses that can, but this is one of the big challenges that we see when you're moving to full fleet, full electrification, when you're moving that direction. So if we can go to the next slide. And then this is again reiterating really what Christina mentioned about the changes in utility rates. So I won't get into detail on any of this. It's more just to provide you the two examples for where we are currently, and then where some of the rates are changing to, and throughout today's call, you've heard that there's differences in energy costs and energy and demand costs. You heard that from Thierno when he showed the actual bills that they had, and this difference ends up being really important. And what we were able to see, looking for VTA is, we recognize that PV costs are coming down, and it's a really nice opportunity, and that a combination of charge management system design and including PV can really help manage that electricity bill. So that's kind of the main takeaway, and then digging into the changes in rates a little bit, and this is really what alludes to what Christina mentioned, is they are changing. So we normally think about the peak price happening in the afternoon. Well, if you have a lot of solar, that might not be in the afternoon. It might change. So that might it could make it easier, or it could make it harder for the transit agencies that are charging buses off the grid and that aren't using either solar or stored energy. So that's really just something else to think about. So those are the two challenges. And then if we can go to the next slide, hoping to show the opportunity now. And so if we characterize that on the right, you can see a map. It's a hotspot map of travel, and these are anywhere that's either red or green. Shows that the kind of light green shows where buses are mostly on VTA system. And so using tools like this and just understanding how your system is operating and where buses are, there are really other opportunities potentially to charge. So you can charge more often at the depots, which are the three items that have names by them. You can see that the buses are there a lot. Obviously, they park there at night. But also there's a number of other transit centers that have a significant amount of time where buses are staying there. So that represents another nice area. There's a lot of en-route charging. You can see that there's short dwell times across the network. So there's opportunities for en-route charging, the kind of fast overhead charging. If it's not a conventional charger for the bus, you can do other things there. One other opportunity is to have either extra buses or essentially extra capacity. So you have maybe a swappable battery that you have at places where you switch out, or just extra buses in your network that you can leave at the depot and charge, and then bring other buses out. And then lastly, the stationary batteries, which you've heard mentioned before. So just to get you thinking about a few of the ways that we can possibly push even further with integrating PV and the transit buses. So I'll stop there and pass on.
Thanks so much, Christina and Josh. So we started at Indigo in Indianapolis and worked our way west to Santa Clara in California. Now we're going to go even further west with Oahu Transit Services at Roger. So first we'll hear from Roger, and then he also has a colleague from the utility, Hawaiian Electric, Jimmy, on the line, who can provide a few short remarks as well as be available for questions during the panel discussion. So after Roger and Jimmy present, we'll transition over into our panel discussion and Q&A portion. So I've seen some questions already come in, so definitely feel free as the panelists are speaking to use the questions feature on your GoToWebinar panel to submit a question, and I will relay that to the speakers. And so take it away, Roger.
Oh, thank you. Aloha, everybody from Honolulu. We are proud in Honolulu. We often say that Hawaii is a special place. And it really is when we're looking at electrification of transportation. For one thing, our island has about 600 square miles, including about 120 miles of coastline. We have interstate highways, but obviously they don't interstate anywhere. And our service area is ideal for public transportation. We have can we go to the next slide, please? We have a fairly extensive operation in Hawaii. We have currently we have about 550 buses. We are building a 20-mile grade-separated transit system, the first segment of which will open next year, and that's going to substantially change the way that we operate our service. So we're projecting by 2035 to be up to about 576 buses. And in terms of mileage on the buses, we're estimating that we would be operating somewhere in the ballpark of 21.5 million miles of service. Now, how much energy does 21 million miles of service take? Our estimate is that over a course of a year, we'd be looking at about 60 gigawatt hours of service of energy. Now, 60 gigawatts is a tremendous amount of energy. Just to give an idea of how much that is, I put the picture up here of the two Hawaiian islands of Lanai and Molokai. Both of those islands combined consume about 60 gigawatt hours over a year's time. So the idea, and I think I saw the slide earlier, that one e-bus can be the same as about 15 homes. In Hawaii, I think with our high cost of energies and our other things, we estimate that one electric bus would be equivalent to about 20 average homes in Hawaii. So that's an awful lot of power. Another unique thing about Hawaii is that there is only really one local government unit, and that's the county level. We don't technically have municipalities in Hawaii, we just have counties. The island of Oahu constitutes the city and county of Honolulu. That may make it more easy to coordinate energy policy because we're not dealing with multiple counties, we're not dealing with multiple municipalities, and it makes it easier. Now, when we started thinking about how we would electrify public transportation on Oahu, the first stop that we made was to Hawaiian Electric, to the utility, and that was really about 4 years ago. And from that time on, as we've been talking, we've been looking at how we would operate. And can I have the next slide, please? What we determined was that in order to make this happen, we would have to look at a multiple strategy of some en route charging opportunities, and we're looking at in many cases we're looking at co-locating those with our alignment of our rail system. We also have some other non-rail transit systems, transit centers that make sense to us, and as long as with our depots where we would do depot charging. So we would likely end up with a combination of both depot charging at a conventional at about 125 kilowatt hour charging systems to some en route charging opportunities where we would look at higher rates of charging, maybe in the 450 kilowatt hour level. We have a mixed fleet that includes both articulated buses, quite a few of those, along with 40-foot buses. And at some of our transit centers, we have the benefit of having quite a few buses that are going to be going into the transit centers. This brings up the need for us to look carefully at how we operate our buses and how we schedule our buses so that we can take maximum advantage of solar energy. Now, in Hawaii, solar, it is said that the concentration of rooftop solar in Hawaii is greater than anywhere else in the world. And that's an interesting thing. So from my perspective as a transit operator, I don't look at, although we have installed quite a bit of on-site solar, our major objective is to shift demand as much as we can to those solar hours, and then rely upon grid-generated solar, both rooftop and the utility has a lot of purchase power agreements with large solar arrays as well. That's the strategy. Now, with dealing with the utility, we were able to over the last few years to have a pilot e-bus tariff published by our regulator or by the electric utility and approved by our regulator. And for details on that, I'd like to shift this discussion now to Jimmy Yao from Hawaiian Electric.
Okay, thanks, Roger. Could we just go to the next slide really fast? Okay. Currently on Oahu, we have about 50,000 distributed rooftop solar installations, providing about 500 megawatts of distributed solar around the island. So because of this, our time of use rates are now targeting for electric usage during the midday solar generation hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. So it's a little bit different than some of the other slides you've seen. And we have no seasonal time of use rates. So as part of our Hawaiian Electric electrification and transportation strategy, we requested and were approved electric bus pilot rate for separate bus charging service, which provides about 25% less cost of energy during these midday hours. We understand that the buses are operating during those time of day, so we're also providing roughly 15% discount for energy during the off-peak hours of 10 p.m. to 9 a.m. But the rates are much higher during the on-peak, as you see in the chart. So the conditions of these rates is there needs to be an existing commercial demand service at that location. So the assumption is based that creating the additional charging load would be outside of the on-peak hours and don't add to the total demand peak of the total service of the existing service with the bus charging service. So there's no extra infrastructure, hopefully, that will be added outside for our distribution system. So the e-bus rate has no contribution for kilowatt hour demand outside of anything on the on-peak hour. So you saw the chart before from another utility showing the demand rate. So if you don't charge during the on-peak hours, there's no contribution from this rate to demand costs. And then, so the new bus pilot rate was approved earlier this year. It's currently effective through 2023. And we currently have a private bus operator with 3 electric buses on this rate, and we're collecting data and we'll be filing annual reports to our commissions. So that's my presentation.
Thank you. Roger, anything you want to mention or before we transition?
This is a brave new world for us, obviously. But like other places, our local government and our state government have both adopted goals to electrify public transportation by 2035. That means that it's going to be a journey for us over the next 15 years, hopefully, to implement our vision for Hawaii.
Thank you, and thanks so much to all our panelists. Really appreciate you all taking the time. We really think we assembled a stellar crew of transit agencies and their partners that are really at the forefront of integrating solar and electric bus and transit agency operations. So we will now transition to our discussion portion and our Q&A. So again, to all the attendees, please feel free to type in any questions you have for any of our panelists, and I will relay that to them. And before we do that, I did want to throw out a question to all our panelists, and maybe Jimmy and Roger might be the best suited to answer this, but anyone else feel free to chime in. But with the pilot rate that you all just mentioned, I'm wondering if you have any suggestions or advice on how transit agencies can collaborate and provide input to their utilities on regulations that meet the needs for both the transit agency trying to charge all these electric buses without encouraging a huge cost and the utilities that still works with the limitations of their capacity. So Jimmy or Roger, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I'll give you some observations. First, this is not going to be an inexpensive endeavor for us, even on the distribution side, that we would probably look at over a period of time, somewhere in the $60 to $100 million range for infrastructure. That would be infrastructure that we would have in our charging systems, in our depots, and charging systems en route. That's on the distribution side, but that's over probably a 10-year period. And so, if we're lucky and it's 60 million, then perhaps something on the order of $6 or $7 million per year as we expand out our infrastructure to support 100% fleet within 15 years. So that's one thing. Now, I think that in dealing with Hawaiian Electric, I think there is a consensus view in Hawaii, and it was I can commend the utility for trying to understand our business, when the buses are in, when the buses are out, understand the limitations that we have as a transit operator there's no way we could possibly match the solar radiation times. So it's going to be a hybrid strategy for us. We probably will incur some demand charges, even in that thing, because of the opportunity charging model that we are looking at. But we have, we hopefully will be smart enough that we will be able to figure out how to minimize those demand charges, and at the end, make it a cost-effective energy source for us to use.
That was Jimmy.
You
So
want
I'll just,
to talk about anything?
yeah, I'll just add a few thoughts. So I think it's important for both entities to engage early, not just on rate design, but also for the infrastructure needed to bring in the charging infrastructure. But I'd have to say, with us, we went in with the flavor of trying to match daytime solar renewable generation. But I think it's also important that we message this to our commission that this is a pilot. We are doing data gathering, and we will inform on this over the next few years, and hopefully everything will show very favorable results. But I think that's one of the keys, is going in from a regulated utility, is framing it as a pilot and showing results. That's pretty key.
Great. Any of the other panelists want to chime in on the topic of coordinating between the transit agencies and utilities on either rates or regulations?
This is Christina from the VTA. We have been engaging with our Public Utilities Commission as well as our utility on rates, on infrastructure, and I feel like it has been very beneficial, even though the process has been very difficult to understand, and that's probably where SolSmart can really be beneficial to a lot of others by helping them navigate the very complex Public Utility Commission engagement process. But we've definitely been able to influence some of these proceedings, and even though it's very hard to kind of know what's going to work in the future, I mean, we have a sense of what's going to work now, but as you get at scale, things change. We feel like it is really important for transit to be at the table and to help shape some of the policies that are being made right now.
Great. Thanks, Christina. So I'll turn. Oh, go ahead, Philip.
This is Philip from the SolSmart team, and I just wanted to echo what Christina said and say that that is a very good way to engage SolSmart. If you would like to start thinking about how you would engage with the PUC in your state, or PSC, or whatever entity you have regulating the utilities, or engaging with the utilities, I should say that we don't necessarily engage in advocating directly, but we can certainly give you some advice for how the timing of when you might want to think about some of these things, and some of the key bits of information you might want to package to help you tell your story about the importance of managing these rate structures and utility environments. So definitely something that we can engage in. We just want to make sure we're not lobbying, and we would be pretty easily able to tell the difference there. Just because this is a DOE federal funded project, we'll just be careful, and we'll be happy to engage on those topics.
Thanks, Philip. So turning over to some of the questions we've gotten from attendees. First one I see here directed towards Tierno and Mark. Susanna's wondering, what federal grant did Indigo use to construct solar on their main transit facility?
It was a low-no grant. Just like our expansion is also coming from a low-no grant, part of the Volkswagen catastrophe a couple years ago settlement that they came to because of this TDI is where that grant money is coming from currently.
Great. All right, next question also for Indigo. I happen to know this person is located in Indianapolis because she's my mom, and she is wondering, for Indigo, are you working on non-utility solar sourcing, including creating your own solar local grid? and she congratulates you on RTL, which she's considering a major success.
As far as solar sourcing, we're kind of landlocked where we're at currently. We are looking to try to expand, as far as other properties that can expand our solar, but currently we're just looking at expanding on what we have available to place solar panels at the moment. Yes, in the future, we like to get as big as we can with the solar, but then again, we have to deal with the IPL, our local utility, and the Indiana regulatory saying that you can only have 1 megawatt of net metering of solar at one time. So we're looking at different options. Yes, we like to expand, but at this point, we're kind of limited to the footprint we have to go with.
Thanks, Mark. For transit agencies in general, any panelists that want to chime in, are there plans to incorporate grid battery storage or on or off site to utilize during peak utility charges and or disaster recovery of utility services unavailable? So I know some of you touched upon this, but any more you'd like to say about integrating storage and microgrids, and also how to connect the electric bus and or solar efforts with resilience efforts at the agency?
This is Christina from
I'll say
VTA.
something about that. In Honolulu, we certainly recognize the need for some amount of energy storage. Chances are that as we ramp up, that will become more important for us. Our strategies for risk mitigation could include energy storage on site. I know Hawaiian Electric is also planning grid energy storage. I don't know much about that. And also by distributing our power, our charging locations to 8 or 9 locations, that also somewhat mitigates the problem of losing a single one. We've looked at repurposing our bus batteries as they become not useful for transportation. Maybe in a 7, maybe 8 or 9. Nobody really knows how long that's going to be. But we do know that there's still a lot of battery left when they're no longer useful for transportation vehicles, and that could become part of our strategy. But that would be something that we've noted, but we would probably implement as we ramp up and scale up. At the margin, we can deal with emergencies at the margin, but as we scale up and ramp up, that's when we will have to look at the ability to withstand a hurricane or a local outage of some kind.
Christina, did you want to chime in too?
Yeah, I'll just add to that we have conceptualized a microgrid project for this very reason, that combines energy storage with the solar with the bus charging in order to accomplish a variety of different goals related to helping to smooth out our load so that we can better manage our costs and kind of combine it with some of the charge management technology that we're just about to begin testing in a few days, and also to help us with a lot of the changes that are coming down with dynamic pricing and real-time pricing, and really being able to use it all together to really help manage our costs. And we definitely see a real resiliency benefit from having storage combined with solar and EV charging. I mean, during the winter, we have about 1 megawatt of solar at our location where we have our 5 electric buses. And during the winter, we estimate that we could charge about 5 buses off the solar if it was charging at the same time as the solar was generating. But during the summer, we could charge up to 50 buses. So if you have storage, your grid goes down, you could really keep a pretty decent sized fleet up and running. And that's in combination with the backup generation that we already have at this facility. So really looking at that closely, just trying to find the right funding approach to make that happen.
With regard of Indigo, can I jump in?
Yeah.
We have a big fleet, electric fleet, and so far with the solar array we have with 1 megawatt, and we are consuming everything, all the power it can generate during the peak hours, because buses with the range you were talking about earlier, buses have to come back often during the peak time, during days to recharge. So with that, we are using all the production. So we were thinking about with the expansion of the solar arrays, if we got enough power, we might think about, having some storage in case of emergency, because currently we don't have any storage in case of, tornado or something, we will be out of power. So this is something Indigo is thinking about, to see what is the alternative to go about for, for an emergency situation. So this is a good question that we will think, Indigo is thinking about, because our consumption, yeah, we have like around, 900 gigawatt a month. That's a lot. So we have to have some kind of storage for daily support in case of emergency. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had another question from Susanna that wanted to know if a local government's transit agency would like technical support, who at SolSmart would be the best person to contact. So I just want to turn it over to Philip to give a little bit more details on how the mechanics of requesting technical support go.
Sure. So we didn't provide our contact information at the end of this slide deck, unfortunately. We should have. We just neglected to. But basically, when we send out the follow-up information, we will you'll be able to respond to that email address. It may come from Toya at the Solar Foundation, and she can put us all in touch. And she often is the person who triages and delegates requests from folks, so she can connect, whether it's folks at NREL or at CADMIS or EPRI or any of our other partners. She can help get the right people in the room to make the discussion, to discuss your specific issue or questions. And the only thing we'd request before you do make the ask of us is that you start to engage, if you're coming at this from the perspective of a transit agency or a stakeholder that's not necessarily directly a SolSmart participant, that you do sort of engage them to coordinate and make sure that this request is something that would be aligned with their interest in advancing solar in their community. And we don't see any reason to expect that the folks that participate in SolSmart from the municipal government perspective would say that you shouldn't make the request. So it seems like it should be a pretty easy ask, but we do want to have coordination happening at the local level, and then we'll be happy to engage with you.
Thanks, Philip. A couple of the transit agency panelists that presented mentioned the integration with rail, and we have a question from Mackenzie. For those transit agencies that do have rail in addition to electric buses, have you looked at solar power to power traction power substations?
That's an awful lot of power for solar to generate for traction power. I think there are other strategies, and I think of the group here, probably VTA has the most experience. We are about a year out, but there are wayside power storages. There's what you can, there are different strategies, but I think solar would be a difficult strategy directly for a rail because of the all day long and the acceleration, and there are just other issues I think with rail. But I would be interested to hear from the VTA folks.
This is Christina from VTA. We do operate a pretty extensive light rail system, electrified light rail system. It is powered through traction power substations and catenary wires. So, we're using electricity real time. And so while we use it throughout the day, and, it in some ways overlaps with some of the overgeneration issues that are happening with the utilities, we really haven't found a good way to integrate solar with rail, at least in the form that we operate it. We've certainly heard about that there's technology out there for battery electric trains, which may, have more ability to integrate the solar, but in terms of the way our system's set up, especially with the traction power substations and, just integrating something with them, we're really hesitant about that. But there are other opportunities for, batteries to kind of store some of the energy that's generated on the line if you run frequent enough service, but really haven't found a ability to integrate solar in a major way with a electrified rail system like ours.
Thanks, Roger and Christina. We have a question from Fernando on payback. So, all the transit agencies we've heard from are at different stages of integrating solar with electric bus charging. So some are using the solar from the grid, some are using the solar on site. But just curious if we could hear from the panelists about expected payback for our solar and in cases where applicable, storage to charge e-buses. And what do you think about the use, whether solar is economically viable in, for example, northern geographies where solar resources are a little bit more limited, although Indianapolis is not Hawaii, so.
Well, as far as, because Indiana is not the greatest place to have solar, like you said, you're probably looking at about a 15-year payback on any investment in solar, as far as when you're in Indiana goes.
Yeah, I think that it would be unlikely that we would get an economic where we would be able to come out ahead unless we include in the analysis the externalities that we're talking about, clean air, reduction of greenhouse gases, and we value those at an appropriate rate. In that case, we are, but our analysis is that we might save maybe $2 or $3 million a year on diesel. It's unknown exactly what our maintenance savings will be. We anticipate that there will be maintenance savings, but primarily in the areas of preventative maintenance, those types of areas. But our analysis indicates that this is not likely to be an economic saving, and it's being driven by our city leaders and our state leaders that want us as a policy to go to a renewable energy model. And I think when we look at it in a broader context of global warming and everything local, all things really start locally, act local and think global. That to me it's absolutely the right thing, and I think it's a tremendous payback. But the payback is not one that I'm going to be able to monetize on my annual budget.
Yeah, I want to be a little bit specific here, give some technical, to go back to Roger, what he said. Really, we're not going to get the payback through the production, because if I give an example here, by Indigo, in 2018, our solar array, we produced a total of 1,116 kilowatt hours. So that's, if you see that, megawatt hour. If you change that on our rate, we just saving, you just producing $100,000. That's to come back to the 100,000 versus $3 million we invest on that. You see, it will take a long time. So this is just to support what Roger just come up with.
Great.
Like Roger was saying.
Oh, go ahead, Mark.
I'm going to say, like Roger was saying, your big savings is going to be in your environmental things, you're not going to be changing oil in buses as often. You're not going to be trying to, get rid of the waste oil, the green gases, or the pollutants that's from the diesel buses and such. In the long range, there's two different ways to look at savings, like Roger was saying.
Right. Josh and NREL, curious if you all did any sort of cost benefit or economic analysis to touch on this question, or Christina, if you have thoughts to build on what we've heard so far.
Yeah, this is Josh. I think we have done a little bit, but I'd say it's still kind of in its infancy, and it's really dependent on a lot of the transit agencies that we've worked with and their specific system and their specific goals. So I can't really provide any kind of like sweeping assessment for all those. But to answer your question, there are a number of things, and I think we have a few resources on our website, a few publications we've released that people can go look at if they're interested.
And this is Christina. When we conceived the solar project back in 2010, 2011, we were estimating that we would get a return on investment of about 1.5 million over 20 years. And this was using a power purchasing agreement model where we had no upfront costs, but we actually did have a pretty high cost per kilowatt hour because it was more expensive at that time. I think the rates have gone down quite a bit since then. But, there were a lot of assumptions on which that power purchasing agreement was based. It was based on utility prices, which at that time were escalating pretty dramatically every year, being at least 5%, and they actually have been less than that in some years and more than that in others. And then we didn't really anticipate that there was going to be this major change in solar rate design, which is really going to affect the economics of it. So it's hard to tell where we'll end up. But I think, as other panelists have mentioned, we did it primarily because of our commitment to sustainability.
Right. We have another question from Michael related to the charging infrastructure. So, are there opportunities to collaborate with other agencies that are using electric vehicles? Maybe they're light duty, medium duty, heavy duty, also obviously be the most directly applicable, but are there opportunities to collaborate with other agencies that are installing charging stations at their locations and sort of coordinate amongst the charging needs you all have with other agencies?
I can say on that question.
But we, the difficulty is everybody else has their own base yards. They have their own. So it is, they may have different standards of what type of electrification they're planning, whether it's refuse trucks or other big fleet operators and municipalities. So in theory, there probably are, but we haven't been that advanced where we've really attempted to see whether or not there is a synergy.
This is Michelle Levinson from Cadmus. I'll jump in here as well. With some of the agencies we've collaborated with, we've seen opportunities for cooperation across agencies that share transit hubs, for example, and those might be optimal locations for some en route charging, where the high upfront costs can be spread across multiple agencies to increase the utilization of that infrastructure. And likewise, when agencies are thinking about going down the pathway of collaborating with their regional peers, that can increase their resilience again, because it means that you can go and use the charging infrastructure of your peer agencies and vice versa. And the key here is that you need to be acquiring and collaborating, acquiring interoperable equipment, interoperable chargers, and interoperable buses. So being aware of what your peer agencies are doing from that perspective. And then, of course, there's the opportunity for collaborating on cooperative purchases, which we've seen in a few different locations, and it's certainly appealing, I think.
Thanks, Michelle. Tierno, did you want to respond to?
Yeah, they almost said what I wanted to say, so just back up now. So it's basically the same thing because they might have more experience. In Indianapolis, we have only one transit service, that's Indigo, so we just don't have the thing. But I know that it's a possibility of cooperating with other agencies if that were around. But that may be a big plan in the head because, like the last panelist said, you gotta be like interconnectability between the fleet and all that kind of stuff. You're not gonna be a long-term plan ahead, because we're not gonna just have to have the same buses or maybe having the same capacity or the connectability, the hardware, and all kind of stuff. It's not that simple. It's a big vision.
And Jimmy, if I could turn to you at Hawaiian Electric, I know Hawaiian Electric has this electrification of transportation plan. So I'm wondering if you could speak at all to any of the coordination amongst different agencies and different players in general that are involved with that plan. And if this type of discussion about charging infrastructure has come up there.
Yeah, in particular, you mean sharing charging infrastructure, or?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, we haven't engaged in that level yet. We have started. Our currently electric fleets are still ramping up, so there's not that much of a desire at this point. I think some of the agencies, like the border water supply, our water company over here, has asked if we could possibly partner in light duty fleet charging infrastructure, because we have meter readers that go out and they have water meter readers that go out too. But the heavy duty fleet, I think, is a little bit different. I think the technology is still emerging. I think different fleets different types of vehicles have different charging. So a lot of the big transit buses now, they've advanced to this 800 volt charging system. So even at one time, one of the private operators, they brought one of their buses to charge at one of our DC fast charging stations, our public DC fast charging stations, and it just wouldn't work. So there's some interoperability issues too. So I think it does have to be planned out very smartly. But for right now, we're just in the infancy. We're mostly talking about light duty fleet and not so much of sharing heavy duty fleet charging right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is Philip at Cadmus, and I just wanted to jump in on a point that Michelle made about cooperative procurement and emphasize that has, I think, a lot of real substantial potential in the future as more and more agencies start to think like the panelists today are thinking about electrification of their fleets. And organizations like CalSTART, which is a collaborator of ours from time to time, they've been working on some really innovative and interesting things to try to provide cooperative contracts that should be available to purchasers statewide, so that people don't need to reinvent the wheel every time they go out to bid. And we've seen this. We've worked with regional councils as well that have done the exact same thing, not in the transit space, but for other vehicles. And it definitely stands the potential to result in cost savings and operational efficiencies and efficiencies in staff time.
Thanks, Philip. So we have 5 minutes left. So I'd like to pose one final question to our panelists here, and I'll go around and everyone can chime in. And the question is really, it sounds like a negative, but it could be turned into a positive about, you are the transit agencies and their partners that are really at the forefront of this integration with solar and electric bus charging in various ways. So what are some advice that you would provide to other transit agencies, especially seeing, with the regulations in California that their zero emission regulation could also apply to hydrogen buses, but many transit agencies will continue to electrify their fleet in California and outside of California. So based on any pitfalls you've experienced or mistakes you've made, what sort of advice would you give to other transit agencies embarking on the same journey of not only electrifying their fleet, but also trying to figure out how to best leverage renewables to help with that electrification? So I see Tierno first on my series of webcams, so I'm gonna start with you.
Yeah, that's only thing like is to go ahead, think about ahead how much power you might need to produce. If you wanna go, if you have an electric fleet, for example, you know how many buses you're gonna have and what's gonna load and how you're gonna consume that, and contact your utility because the law differ from area to area to know how much they can allow you to produce, and more likely make sure like any kind of solar arrays you're going to be putting in, you might be able to consume all the energy because most of facilities don't like the net metering too much. But so if you can consume it, make a plan ahead and make sure also you have the space for it. And but the most important thing is to be allowed also because they got a lot of restriction of how much you can produce depending on the area you are. Like specifically in Indianapolis here, 2015, we were, limited to 1 megawatt, a net metering possibility. So even if we wanted to do more than that, we couldn't, although we knew that we have buses that, and the facility could consume way more than 1 meg. Because just our electric buses at the time, the 21 electric buses, they were gonna to charge them. We needed like at least 850 850 kilowatt hour energy to charge them. And the rest of the facility on peak time will consume almost 1.2 meg. And so we had the capacity to, consume all that, but we were just limited to 1 meg. So this is something you have to know. And also make sure if you put it on top of your roof system, make sure the roof has, a good sustainability because it's a big problem if you have to work on the rooftop after you put all this investment over there because if there is a leak or something, you're going to have a lot of problem. I know Mark can jump on that. He's the facility. He knows how important it is to look ahead on that.
Okay, I can jump in. Like Cherno was saying, if you're going to do solar or if you're going to electrify your fleet, you definitely want to start early with utilities. I mean, that's key. You don't want to make a big plan on something and find out the utility is going to say, we can't supply you this or you can't do that. Early stages, get in there early with the utility company to verify what you can or cannot do. And as far as placement of solar, rooftop to me is not ideal. But if that's the only space you have, yes, verify before you put it up there. So you have a good roof with a good warranty. So you're not going to have to pull, it's going to be a major feat whenever we have to replace this roof. It's going to take us 3 times as long as what it normally would because of removing and replacing panels. But if you have the available green space for your solar or alternate energy, I would recommend going that route instead of a rooftop if at all possible. Other than that, Cherno did a pretty good job. So.
Good job, Indigo. So back to the speaking order we had then, Christina and Josh. Do you have any advice you'd like to share?
This is Christina. One piece of advice I'd like to share is just to really understand. I'll echo the other panelists' comments about starting early with your utilities, but also really understanding a lot of these new rate designs that are coming out for electric vehicles. One of the things that we learned by a new rate that was recently approved is that you have to have your vehicles on a separate meter. and from your facility. So setting things up in a way that you can take advantage of some of these new rates like Hawaii Electric has developed is really important. And our solar is the solar would also need to be on that meter in order for it to be more integrated. And also really understanding what's going on in general with rates as they affect solar really affects how much you're going to get in terms of a return on investment.
And this is Josh. I would add, in addition to that, even beyond just retail rates, there are potential opportunities to access wholesale rates, which I haven't heard mentioned today, but another potential opportunity if you're a large consumer. So that's one. I think more generally, and this is really kind of to what Mark was mentioning before, and more broadly, is considering the other benefits. So if you look at just what your fuel cost is and the cost of the bus and electricity, you're missing some of the other O&M benefits that are harder to quantify. Waste management, some of the other credits and incentives we heard mentioned today. So I think you really have to also look at those, and then there's a lot of options which I think can be overwhelming for working with integration of PV and buses and just battery electric buses in general. So there's a lot of options as has definitely come across today, and introducing the buses and PV with the buses can affect operations. It can make things more complicated for dispatchers. So I really think, I guess the phrase might be keep your mind open as a transit agency, and because there's things like route redesign that can be, again, complicated, but can really help. All of our routes were currently made for conventional buses. So if we're switching that paradigm, if we're switching to a paradigm where we want to use PV because it's a resource and we want to work with buses that have different ranges, I think you have to also consider changing how the system was itself designed. So that's
Thanks,
it.
Josh.
Thanks.
Any final thoughts from Roger or Jimmy?
From me, I would advise people that are thinking about it to at the margin to jump in, and apply for a NOLO grant and get yourself a little experience at the margin. The margin is very different than as you move towards scale. And I can't emphasize what the last speaker, Josh, said about getting operations involved as well, getting schedulers involved, looking at the different opportunities to charge your vehicles. It probably depends a lot on the way you block, the way whether the routes are close to a potential depot or whether they're far away, and to start at the margin, but never lose sight of what it would look like as you move to scale, because it's probably going to be very different at scale than it's going to be at the margin. But if there is with the government programs that are available now at FTA, the Low-No program that's being distributed pretty broadly across the country for those that apply, that gets you a small start. But I think that's a good place to start, would be by looking at a Low-No grant and trying to just get your feet wet on electrification.
Yeah, this is Jimmy. So as a sole representative of a utility, I guess just engage a utility early. These projects are definitely not small. So engage early. Hopefully it'll give you a successful project and your charging infrastructure will be there before your buses show up.
Great. Well, thank you so much again to all our panelists. Really appreciate you taking the time. I know these things take a lot of coordination and collaboration and planning and preparation. So thank you so much for helping us pull this webinar together. And I hope you all are able to stay in touch as you continue on your journey of integrating solar and electrifying your fleets. And thank you to SolSmart for hosting the webinar. And the presentation slides and the recording will be available online, so feel free to share with your colleagues and other transit agencies in a few days. So thank you again, and best of luck to our panelists in their continued efforts.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.